What's happening, everybody? Welcome to episode 13 of Daily Dev Club on Wednesday the 29th of May. We're back today looking at our Battle Shapes Unity top-down 2D game. We're going to mess around a little bit with the user interface, now the title screen, look at how buttons work on the user interface, and then we're going to add a new enemy type to make things interesting that will be a little bit tougher and require more than one hit to destroy. So, without further ado, let's get into the code. Okay, so we're going to set up a menu screen for our Battle Shapes game. It's the first thing we're going to do today's episode. So we're going to hop into Photoshop and just set up a sort of title screen asset that we can drop in. So let's separate that from the sprites, just to keep things nice and neat. We'll just call that images. Want those two. Okay. Now we're going to need to set up a new scene for our menu screen, and then we'll set that as the scene that loads when the game loads. And we'll look at how we can transition from that to the actual game. So in scenes, we have our main scene. We're going to create a new scene. We'll call that title. And we'll double click on that to open that up. So you can see our hierarchy now is empty. We're working on this title scene. And we are going to create some UI. So let's have an image. That will create our canvas structure like we had before. And then if we click on that, we are going to want to go to images, drag that across to our source image. Okay. Then we're going to want to make sure we scale this out. So here. Make sure that looks how we want. Okay, so that's going to be our title, and then we want in the UI we want a button. So we'll create a button that again goes into here, and in source image we'll drag across our play. We'll just size that to the sort of size we want and put that where we want it. Okay, right. So we have our scene here. It looks great. Let's just, so for the button itself, text, we don't really want the text, so I think we just delete that underneath, keep the button, rename that to play. Now the way the button works, look, we have our button script over here. and we have our on click. So when we do our on click, we can select an object and then a function to call on that object, and that's what will fire when we actually press the button. So what we'll do is we'll create an empty game object, and we'll call this menu manager, similar to how we have the game manager in our game scene. And in scripts, we'll create ourselves a C# script called menu manager. We're going to drag that across to our menu manager. Wait for that to finish compiling. That's done now. And we can see that in there. So when we go to our play button, add our on click, we're going to select our, we'll just drag our menu manager across to the object. I think my mouse might be broken. And we can see, so on our menu manager game object, we have obviously different components. We've got the game object transform and our menu manager script, and then we've got the different methods, sort of built-in methods. So we're going to write a method, a function that's going to handle the scene transition for us, and then we're going to hook that up to the on-click. So if we go over to our code, and we put our new menu manager script, and what we'll do now is we will add a function to actually load the game. So we'll call public void load game. Okay, so we have our load game function, and we are going to want to call the code to load our main scene. So for that, we're going to need to add a new reference up here. Unity engine scene management, and then our load game, we will use our scene manager load scene, and then we just pass in the name. So it's main. So that's our function there. We go back to the on-click handler here. We've already selected the menu manager object. Wait for that to compile so it can load that in. We select our menu manager component, and we have our load game function there. So now when we hit play, we should have our title screen. Click there, there's nothing. Click on our play button, and we go into our game. So that's pretty cool. So we have our menu scene set up, our title screen set up. Very basic, but at least it gives us something to load into first, and then a button there to get into the game. Cool. Okay, so that's the menu setup. So next up, I think we will look at in the game over state. So if we go to our main scene, we're going to hook this back up so we can go back to the menu, and also a button to restart. So at the minute, let's reduce the round timer just so we can see. Let's just set it to 3 seconds. We can still load directly into the game we want to by just sort of working on the main scene and hitting play. But you can see here we have this screen, and obviously our R to restart. It'd be nice if we actually had a couple of buttons here that we can then hook up to restarting and also going back to the menu. So let's have a quick look at our UI. Let's add some basic text buttons. Let's add some button there. This will be our restart. Put that below game over. That's slightly bigger. We'll leave the text element in there. We'll change the text to restart. Bump that up. Okay, cool. We'll duplicate that, and we'll call this menu. We'll set that on that side, and the text for that one is going to read turn to menu. To reduce the font size on that a bit, there we go. Okay, so now we have two buttons to hook up, so we need two methods. We'll add these on our game object, our game manager, and same as we did before. So we'll use the scene manager, and down here we'll have our public methods. One's going to be to restart. Actually, we might have a restart one already, don't we? We have a start game, which is what we call when we hit the R. So we have that already. So we just need our load menu. And just like we did down here, except our scene is called title, so it's just going back the other way now. So let's look to hook these up. We have our menu button, add our on click, just the one, drag our game object across, and then the function, we're going to go in, we select the game manager, and we are going to select load menu. And then the same for our restart button, add one in, drag our game object across, and we can see that our stop game isn't in there. That's because we have defined that previously as a private method, so we'll just change that so it's more accessible. Wait for that to recompile to show in the list. Game manager, and have our start game. So that's our button set up now. Now the only thing we have to do is make sure they don't show, because they're going to be showing all the time. Look. So we can test to make sure they work. Restart the game. Our return to menu one doesn't. Let's have a quick look why that is. So we have our title scene. The error we're getting is scene title couldn't be loaded because it's not been added to the build settings. So we need to make sure that the overall game knows about our different scenes. So we go to build settings, and we can see in here scenes in build, only scenes main. So we need to save this scene, pop back to our title scene, then we'll go back to our build settings. We'll hit add open scene, and we can see there that it's now added. We can close that down. We can go back to our main, and let's just test this out. And that works. So we're now in the title and the game. Title and the game. Okay, great. So now we just need to make sure these aren't showing, and they only show there. We have that game over state. So for that, we could obviously do what we were doing before with our game over label, which is where we define that on the game manager. So we have a reference to it, and then we're setting it's active. But obviously now we've added a few more elements. That's going to be a bit cumbersome to have two additional ones on there. If we had another element on there, we'd have to add that in as well. So perhaps better might be to do what we did with the in-play elements, where we actually just had one reference to a parent object, and then we are treating all of the nested children objects underneath that the same, so we're deactivating them all together. So for that we could then just essentially reference our canvas object. So if on our game up here we define, we can change the game over label now, our game object, we can just have it as let's say game over UI is what we'll call that, and everywhere we are referencing the label we'll change that to UI, and that's going to be the same. We're going to set that to active false, so that everything on there stops running, essentially all the scripts. That includes the rendering and the like the button script that handles the clicks, all of that sort of stuff. So let's make sure that's all the references to the label. Brilliant. Back to here, and then instead of our label being the game over UI, we're just going to drag the whole canvas in. So let's try that now and see if that works how we want it to work. So that works for these elements, but we forgot that we have the UI for the in-game that we don't want to deactivate. So we need to separate those out. So within our canvas, if we create a empty game object, and we'll call that game over, then we'll just put the elements that are related to game over underneath that. And then on our game, instead of having the canvas in there, we will just use our game over objects. Then we're still nesting it, but we should have our score and timer on there. And then our game over UI shows, so that's all nested under here. So if we click on there, we can see all these scripts are active, the buttons, active. If we restart, we can see they're actually grayed out, they're deactivated right now. So in that way we have an easy way to toggle our game over UI without having to add each individual element. We can add other elements now and just nest them underneath. But we have a functioning UI, so we don't just have to use the R on the keyboard. We can hit restart. Or if we're done, we can head back to the menu. Okay, so we're going to add an additional enemy type now. And to make it interesting, we'll make it so that once you hit a certain score, it'll start to spawn that type of enemy in. And we'll make that enemy type so you have to hit it twice to kill it. So it's sort of making the game more difficult as you go on and as the score gets higher. So with our assets, we had obviously the player character currently is the octagon, and we have an enemy which is a triangle. We have this hexagon shape as well, but to distinguish that from the octagon a bit more cleanly, I think let's add a drop shadow or something to it, add a bit of colour. And we'll copy that across into here. So it should show up in there. Oh, that's the images. Let's pop that in the right place. So that should be in sprites. There we go. So that shows up there. So we have our prefab for our enemy. And what we can do is essentially we'll duplicate that to start with. So if we drag that in to our scene, and then we're going to want to change the sprite. So for this one, go back to sprites, we'll take the hexagon across, and then we need to change our collision. See the triangle is still you can see the green outline there, that's the collider. So in our polygon collider down here, we want to edit collider, and we can just change the edges here to actually match our sprite. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, and so for now that'll do. What we'll do is we'll rename this tough enemy, and we'll drag this back into the prefabs. We can then delete that object from our hierarchy. Let's just double check that our normal enemies are loading. Yep. So the cool thing is, obviously in our game object we had our enemy prefab there, so if we change that to our tough enemy, we can make sure that they look how we want and they're using the right sprite. Yeah, we've got them in there. Okay. Bump up that round time for testing next time. Okay, so, but what we really want is to have like an enemy pool and then have it so that above a certain score we can introduce a new enemy. So let's have it in our game manager, and we will have where we've got our game object for enemy, we'll add a new one called tough enemy. And we also want to configure what the score is going to be, so we'll say int tough enemy threshold. So And then in, so let's make sure those two prefabs are hooked up. So the enemy needs to be normal enemy prefab, and the tough enemy will be our tough enemy prefab. We'll leave that score threshold as 100, and then in our create enemy routine, so in here, this is where we're going to want to decide which prefab to use. So we can say if the current score, so is greater than our tough enemy threshold, then we're going to instantiate, we're going to use enemy, but otherwise we're going to use tough enemy. So to use equals enemy by default, but if we're above that score, we're actually going to use the tough enemy. And we switch this to use prefab to use. So normally it's going to be the enemy. As soon as we get over that threshold, we should start to see the tough enemy come in. Let's have a look. There we go, so now we can start to see as they're respawning, they've been taken over by the tough enemies. So now we all have all tough enemies, destroyed all the original ones. We have all these second enemy sprites. So what would be good though is if they didn't necessarily always come in, but we actually had sort of some randomization perhaps. So to do that, if we do random.range between 0 and 1, and it's over 0.5, so it's sort of 1 in 2 chance, as well as being over the score threshold, that's when we'll pull in our tough enemy. So once you get past that threshold, you still might get some of the other enemies come in, or you might get the tough enemy come in. So let's get above the score. So above the score now, we can see the tough enemies coming in, but we're still getting some of the other enemies as well. So then we've got a nice mix as they're spawning in. We're having these tougher ones, but we're not losing those original enemies as well as the wave progresses. So that's quite cool. So that's the spawning done. Obviously our tough enemy at the minute isn't so tough. He's exactly the same as our normal enemy. So for that, we're going to want to make sure that we can configure on our enemy perhaps how many lives they have, how many hits they can take, or on the projectile, yeah. So let's have a look. Okay, so if we want to sort of now, instead of destroying it from the projectile, so that's the projectile itself, isn't it? So this bit here, where we have the collision and we detect the game object, instead of leaving that up to the projectile to destroy the game object, we sort of want to now transfer that over to the enemy to handle, so that it can manage its own lives, so that some enemies might have 1, they might have 2, they might have 3, and that's how many hits they'll need. So if we add our, let's think about this, we want to make this public so we can configure it individually for each prefab as an int, and we'll call it lives, and it'll default to 1, and then we want an internal variable called lives left, and when it first starts, lives left will always get set to the amount of configured lives. And then we need a public method we can call from our projectile called hit. Let's call that hit, and that is going to reduce our lives left by 1. And if the lives left equals greater than or equal to same as less than or equal to 0, then we will destroy this game object. So back in our projectile, instead of destroying the collision game object, now what we do is collision game object get component and we're looking for that enemy type. And that's our enemy. And on enemy we will call hit. So let's make sure that's still working how it should be. See if there's any problems with that. Okay, that's still being destroyed, which is good. And now we're still getting the extra tough enemies. So on our prefab now, we open the prefab. We have our enemy script, 1 life for the enemy, but let's make the tough enemy. We go into there, let's make that 3 lives. So you should have to hit that 3 times before they're going to be destroyed versus the 1 of the normal enemy. So you see now we're using exactly the same logic for both, but with that configuration and the separation of the prefabs, these ones are getting destroyed in 1 life, which is brilliant. And then if we try and get one of these tough enemies, you can see it takes a bit more. 2, 3, yeah, we can see they're taking 3 lives. Cool. So now as our wave progresses, we hit a certain score, it introduces a new enemy type, and that particular enemy type is harder to beat, it has more lives now. And we can configure all that sort of stuff directly from our UI now we've written the code. And there we have it. So we've added some UI for our menu screen, and also at the end of the round to go back to the menu screen or restart. And then we looked at making the enemies a bit more interesting with a new enemy type that was a little bit tougher to beat with some lives. So next time out I think we'll look at actually making it a little less easy on the player. At the minute they're indestructible, so we're going to look at adding taking damage and having player lives. So if they touch an enemy, or we'll add some projectiles so the enemies can shoot back, and if they get hit by those they lose a life. And then we'll actually have a proper little game on our hands, then we can see what the difficulty is like and tweak it from there. So that's what we'll cover in tomorrow's episode. But I hope you liked the episode today. If you did, please share it with your friends, and if you want to know when tomorrow's episode drops, hit that subscribe button. And as always, feedback and suggestions in the comments down below, much appreciated. Besides that, have a great day, and hope to see you back here tomorrow for the next Daily Dev Club. Peace out. Hope you enjoyed that episode of Daily Dev Club. If you'd like to see another one, click this link right here. Suggestions and feedback are always welcome down below in the comments, please. And of course, if you want to know when the next episode drops, please smash that subscribe button.